What happens when a careless joke destroys a marriage? Could a single offhand comment end years of trust, affection, and shared life? That's exactly what happened the night I thought I was just being funny. My name is Lyra Caldwell. I'm 31, and I always thought I could get away with clever teasing and harmless flirtations. From the outside, my life looked perfect. A supportive husband, Ethan, 2 children, Sophie and Leo, and a home that seemed happy and orderly. Ethan was calm, thoughtful, and attentive. He remembered birthdays, helped with the kids, and rarely missed a detail. Everyone admired our family, and I used to believe I had it all. But beneath the surface, I craved attention, excitement, and the thrill of bending perception. Routine dinners, predictable conversations, and quiet weekends made me restless. Work became my playground, a place where subtle flirtation and witty teasing could make me feel powerful again. That's where Mark, a coworker and minor influence, entered the picture. He noticed me in ways Ethan hadn't in months, and the attention felt exhilarating. I told myself it was harmless, justified, even necessary. My sister Nola encouraged me to embrace my charm, and my mother Iris praised my independence. Ethan, in comparison, felt rigid, overly serious, and dull. His calmness, once comforting, now seemed like weakness I could exploit. Then came a social gathering, a moment I intended to be clever, witty, and harmlessly teasing. I made a comment, just a joke, or so I thought, about Ethan and his friend, smirking, believing it would amuse everyone. I had no idea that a single careless remark could unravel the years we had built together. That night, my sense of control, my social power, and even my marriage would all be tested, and I was about to discover that words could have consequences far greater than I ever imagined. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I told Ethan I was going to a friend's dinner party Friday night. I kissed him on the cheek, smiled, and said I'd be back by midnight. He barely looked up from his laptop and nodded. That was all the confirmation I needed. To him, I was attending a casual gathering. To me, it was a chance to shine, to be witty, to assert my cleverness in front of friends and family. I didn't think much of it at the time. I believed it was harmless, just playful teasing. The restaurant was warm and crowded, a lively hum of conversation and laughter filling the space. My friends were already there, glasses in hand, exchanging stories about work and life. I joined them, slipping seamlessly into their conversation, laughing at their jokes and adding my own quips. Every glance at the door, every glance at my phone, reminded me that Ethan had no idea of what I was about to do. The thrill of keeping a secret, even a small one, made my chest tighten in excitement. Mark, a coworker and minor flirt, was also there unexpectedly, and I felt the familiar pulse of exhilaration. I smiled politely, letting my eyes meet his across the table, pretending it was casual recognition. But the subtle tension, the recognition of shared history, was intoxicating. My friends laughed at a joke I made, oblivious to the undercurrent. I leaned in slightly when Mark approached, and the brief brush of his hand sent shivers up my arm. I told myself it was harmless, just attention, just fun, nothing permanent, nothing that would matter. As the night progressed, the topic of relationships came up. I smiled at my friends, using sarcasm and teasing to poke fun at Ethan, painting him as a man who sometimes couldn't handle stress or subtle social situations. "Your buddy could teach you a thing or two," I said with a smirk, letting my gaze linger lightly in Ethan's direction. The room erupted with laughter. Friends nodded, encouraging me, clearly amused. I felt a rush, a sense of superiority, the thrill of being clever and in control. Then I noticed Ethan standing quietly at the edge of the room. He hadn't spoken, hadn't reacted, but his eyes were fixed on me. The calm in his gaze made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I tried to maintain my composure, smiling and laughing at the group, pretending everything was harmless. But his silence carried weight. It wasn't anger, it was something sharper: disbelief, disappointment, and quiet hurt. My cleverness, my social dominance, had collided with his quiet authority in a way I hadn't anticipated. Without a word, he turned and left. The click of the door behind him silenced the room for a moment. Friends exchanged uneasy glances. Nola, my sister, whispered something about not pushing it too far, but the thrill I had felt now mixed with unease. I laughed off the tension, tried to reassert my control, and made another joke at his expense. But the moment had passed. I realized, even as I pretended otherwise, that my actions had consequences I hadn't considered. I stayed for the rest of the dinner, forcing laughter and charm, but the earlier excitement had vanished. The echo of his quiet departure, the sense of authority he carried without drama or anger, lingered. I began to feel the first tremors of fear. Fear that my cleverness, my teasing, my manipulations might not be enough. After the party, I walked home, replaying the evening in my head. I had been charming, witty, and socially superior, but it hadn't mattered. Ethan had left, unshaken, unshamed, and in control. The thrill of power had slipped through my fingers. I realized that for the first time, someone had seen through my teasing, my games, my attempts to appear clever, and refused to participate. By the time I reached home, the weight of the evening pressed on me. I tried to rationalize it. He was overreacting. He didn't understand humor. He would come around. But deep down, I felt a stirring of fear, the kind that signals the first real consequences of reckless behavior. My jokes, my smirks, my social dominance, they had set a chain of events into motion, and I had no idea how far they would go, or what I had truly triggered. That night, the first crack in my carefully controlled life had appeared, and I was powerless to stop it. The days after the dinner party were strange. Ethan didn't yell, didn't confront me, but I could feel a change in the air. His silence was heavier than any argument. At home, he moved quietly, methodically, doing what needed to be done without acknowledgement, leaving me to stew in unease. I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong. The comment I made at the party was a joke, harmless, clever, but a small seed of doubt had been planted. His quiet disapproval pressed on me like a shadow, reminding me that my games might have consequences. Work became my escape. Theo, a co-worker and minor flirt, made me feel alive in a way Ethan hadn't lately. He noticed the little things, the way I organized projects, the way I laughed at my own jokes. His attention made me feel admired, important and clever. I rationalized it as harmless fun. It was only small flirtations, quick glances, short messages. I was still in control, I told myself. I was careful. Coffee breaks turned into mini rendezvous. I would meet Theo at a cafe under the guise of discussing work, and we would laugh at small memories or joke about colleagues. Every touch of the arm, every shared laugh made me feel powerful. I reminded myself that Ethan didn't know, that this was temporary, and that nothing serious was happening. The thrill was enough. It made me feel young, desired, and important again. Even texting became a game. Messages about work drifted into teasing, playful remarks, and inside jokes that only Theo and I understood. My thumbs hovered over my phone late into the night, heart racing when a reply appeared. I knew Ethan trusted me to be at work or running errands, and that trust only fueled my thrill. Every secret exchange felt like proof that I was clever, that I could bend reality to my will without consequences. At home, I noticed Ethan watching me more closely. He asked subtle questions about why I had stayed late at work or why I seemed distracted. I smiled, offered plausible explanations about deadlines or meetings, and he seemed to accept them. But I could feel his scrutiny, quiet and deliberate. He wasn't naive, just patient. I told myself I could manage this, that I could keep my thrills separate from the life we shared. I was wrong. My sister Nola continued to encourage my independence. "You deserve to be noticed," she said. My mother Iris praised my career achievements and claimed I deserved fun. Their validation became ammunition. I began to see Ethan as rigid, predictable, almost boring, while Theo made me feel vibrant, clever, alive. I told myself I was justified, that seeking attention outside of marriage was harmless if handled discreetly. Then came a small escalation. Theo suggested meeting after work for a quick coffee. I agreed, pretending it was a work discussion. The cafe was quiet, intimate, and the proximity made my heart race. We laughed, leaned in, and shared subtle touches, each one a thrill I told myself I deserved. Every glance, every smile, reinforced my sense of superiority, the feeling that I could still control my life and experiences, but control is fragile. Even as I justified my actions, a flicker of worry came. What if Ethan suspected? What if he noticed patterns, or overheard something, or checked my messages? I shoved the thought aside, focusing instead on the thrill, the excitement, and the illusion of safety. I was careful, clever, untouchable, or so I believed. By the end of the week, a pattern had formed. Flirtations with Theo, secret lunches, late texts, and small manipulations at home were routine. Every moment felt thrilling, validating, and exciting. I laughed at my own cleverness, convinced I was untouchable, that I could have it all: attention, excitement, and the illusion of control. But the first signs of consequence were quietly appearing. Ethan's gaze, the subtle changes in his behavior, the growing silence at home, were small alarms I chose to ignore. I was living in a carefully crafted fantasy, unaware that every secret meeting, every playful text, was slowly unraveling the safety and stability I had always taken for granted. The thrill was intoxicating, but the consequences were already gathering, waiting for the moment they would strike. A few days later, we were invited to a summer barbecue at our neighbor's house. I told Ethan I was going for fun, to socialize with friends. He nodded, assuming I was just joining the group casually. I spent hours planning my outfit, styling my hair, choosing the right accessories. I wanted to look perfect, to draw attention, and, secretly, to assert my cleverness. It wasn't enough to enjoy the party. I needed to appear witty, socially sharp, and just a little untouchable. The backyard was lively, filled with laughter, the smell of grilled food, and children running around. My friends were already gathered near the picnic table, wine glasses in hand, chatting about work and family. I joined them seamlessly, laughing at their jokes and tossing in my own clever lines. I steered the conversation toward relationships, making small, teasing remarks about husbands, chores, and men who couldn't handle stress. The laughter from the group encouraged me. I felt brilliant, socially dominant, clever beyond question. Then I started nudging more personal jokes toward Ethan. I mentioned how some men never learned, how they could take advice from their friends, and, with a mischievous smirk, said something about how his buddy could teach him a thing or two. The group laughed, clearly entertained. I felt a surge of power, the thrill of being the clever one, the witty, entertaining center of attention. I glanced at Ethan, expecting him to smile or respond, but he didn't. He stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, his expression unreadable. I tried to continue, making jokes about chores and his predictable habits, laughing at my own cleverness. The room responded, reinforcing my sense of control. But Ethan's silence began to weigh on me. I could feel the tension, sharp and quiet, pressing against my carefully curated image. He wasn't angry in a visible way. He wasn't shouting or trying to embarrass me in return. He simply observed, calm, composed, and unshakable. Then, as if to punctuate the night, Ethan turned and left. No word, no argument, just quiet departure. The click of the back door echoed through the backyard. The laughter in the group faltered. Friends exchanged uneasy glances. My sister Nola whispered something to reassure me, but I felt the thrill I had built so carefully dissolve instantly. My power, my cleverness, my ability to charm and dominate the room, it had no effect on him. I realized, too late, that I had misjudged him entirely. I tried to recover, laughing louder, redirecting jokes at general topics, pretending nothing had happened. But the energy of the evening had shifted. The careful balance I had created between social approval and subtle humiliation had collapsed. Ethan's calm, decisive exit reminded me that my cleverness could not manipulate him or control reality. I felt the first real pangs of fear, the understanding that my games, once safe and amusing, now had consequences. After the barbecue, walking home, I replayed every joke, every smirk, every glance I had directed at Ethan. I told myself he was overreacting, that he didn't understand humor, that he would return to his usual self. But deep down, I knew this was different. My teasing, my manipulation, my social dominance had provoked something far more serious than a simple argument. Back at home, the quiet was unbearable. Ethan hadn't returned yet. The house felt strange, and even the children seemed aware of the tension. I tried to distract myself with chores, social media, and texts to friends, but nothing worked. The realization settled heavily. My jokes, my manipulations, my sense of social cleverness, they were no longer effective against the person who mattered most. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart racing. The thrill of power had vanished, replaced by unease and fear. I had pushed boundaries, tested patience, and mocked the one person whose judgment truly mattered. The first cracks had appeared, and I had no idea how deep they would go. The consequences of my actions were already moving toward me, patient, deliberate, and unstoppable. I had crossed a line, and I was about to find out just how far Ethan was willing to go to reclaim control over his life and our family. The morning after the barbecue, the house felt heavy, almost oppressive. Ethan's side of the bed was empty, his coffee untouched. Sophie and Leo moved quietly, sensing tension without understanding why. I tried to convince myself he had just needed space, that this was temporary, that he would come around, but with each passing hour, the pit in my stomach grew. The realization that my jokes had consequences began to press on me. I tried to maintain normalcy. I made breakfast, poured coffee, asked the children about their plans, and smiled brightly, hiding the tight knot in my chest. They watched me closely, their small faces reflecting unease. I forced myself to respond cheerfully to their questions, assuring them that everything was fine. But the silence from Ethan made my words hollow. Every glance around the house reminded me of him, his mug on the counter, neatly folded clothes, the quiet hum of his routines. The familiar environment suddenly felt accusatory, as if the walls themselves were judging me. I checked my phone obsessively, hoping for a text or a call, anything to suggest he was okay. Nothing. Each unanswered notification tightened the tension in my chest. I rationalized it. Maybe he was busy, maybe he was processing, maybe he simply needed to cool off. But rationalizations did little to soothe me. Ethan's absence, his deliberate silence, carried a weight far heavier than any angry confrontation could have. It was controlled, methodical, and intentional. I tried reaching out, sending messages with careful wording, trying to be casual. "Good morning, hope you slept well," I typed. No response. A second message, slightly lighter. "Coffee later." Still nothing. My usual charm, my cleverness, my ability to manipulate him emotionally, none of it worked. I realized, with rising panic, that Ethan's calm was impenetrable. He wasn't reacting emotionally. He was preparing, observing, and quietly taking control of the situation. The children added to the pressure. Leo tugged at my sleeve, asking when Daddy would be home. Sophie's eyes searched mine for reassurance. I smiled weakly, brushing off their concerns. "He'll be back soon," I said, forcing cheerfulness. But inside, I knew it was not that simple. Ethan's absence and deliberate distance were deliberate signals, small but clear, that he was asserting control and documenting every detail. My tricks, my teasing, my social dominance, they meant nothing against his methodical approach. By late morning, I discovered the first evidence of his preparation. A folder sat on the kitchen counter, slightly ajar. Texts, receipts, financial statements, everything I had thought private, everything I had joked or flirted about, meticulously collected. My pulse raced. He wasn't angry in the way I expected. He was precise, calculated, and patient. Every small step I had taken, every clever manipulation, was now part of a record that could be used in ways I could not manipulate or charm away. I tried to reclaim control with charm, attempting smiles and explanations. "It wasn't serious," I whispered to myself, hoping he would see reason. But I knew the calm in his gaze, the quiet certainty in his movements, meant my usual tactics were ineffective. For the first time, I felt powerless. The power I had wielded socially, the thrill of teasing, the rush of attention, all crumbled under the weight of his patient, methodical preparation. Afternoon passed in tense quiet. I moved around the house, straightening pillows, tidying toys, trying to keep busy, but every glance at the folder, every echo of his earlier silence, reminded me of my mistake. My friend's laughter from the barbecue replayed in my mind. I had assumed my cleverness was untouchable. Now it felt fragile, inconsequential. By evening, I felt the first real weight of fear. Ethan had not yelled, had not argued, but he had already begun reclaiming control of our home, our family, and our future. My teasing, my flirtations, my carefully crafted social manipulations, none of them mattered anymore. The house was quiet, the children unaware of the legal and emotional shifts underway, but I sensed the change. The consequences were coming, measured, deliberate, and unavoidable. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the folder on the counter. My hands shook slightly as I picked up a few papers, realizing for the first time that my games had limits, and I had reached them. The freedom I had thought I had, the thrill I had pursued, had triggered a chain of events beyond my control. Ethan's calm, deliberate presence had already begun to dismantle my illusions, and there was no turning back. By midweek, Ethan's silence had become impossible to ignore. He moved through the house with quiet precision, handling chores, routines, and interactions with the children in a calm, deliberate manner. I tried to act normally, to chat lightly with him, to slip in casual touches and smiles, hoping my charm would regain influence. But each attempt was met with measured neutrality, a subtle reminder that my usual manipulations no longer worked. He wasn't angry. He was planning, observing, and quietly reclaiming control over the household and our lives. One evening, he returned home carrying his briefcase. I noticed the weight in his steps, the purposeful calm in his expression. He didn't greet me with warmth or curiosity. He simply set the briefcase down on the kitchen counter and began opening it. I leaned over to see what was inside, my heart thudding with both fear and curiosity. Folders of meticulously organized documents, receipts, and printed messages were spread across the counter. Bank statements, texts, and notes from previous interactions with me, including records of flirtations, jokes, and absences, all carefully logged. My chest tightened. This was not confrontation. This was calculated preparation, and it left me feeling helpless. I tried to approach him, attempting casual conversation, soft laughter, and gentle excuses. "Ethan, can we talk?" I whispered, hoping to charm him into forgiveness. He looked at me steadily, without emotion, and said simply that we would talk, but only in the right way. That short sentence carried far more weight than any shouting match could have. I realized that my usual social cleverness, my charm, and my attempts to manipulate him emotionally were no longer effective. He had begun a strategy that was precise, lawful, and unyielding. Over the next few days, the depth of his planning became clear. Ethan had consulted a lawyer, gathering evidence, documenting interactions, and preparing legal measures to protect the family and its assets. Every detail of my behavior, the late nights, the secretive texts, the flirtations with Mark, even my social teasing, was included in his records. He wasn't seeking revenge through anger or drama. Instead, he was creating a shield of lawful authority that would neutralize my manipulations and ensure stability for the children. Ethan arranged custody measures that would prioritize stability and routine for Sophie and Leo. He consulted financial advisors to safeguard the household's assets, ensuring I could no longer make impulsive decisions that could destabilize our finances. He left nothing to chance. School schedules, extracurricular activities, bedtime routines, and weekend plans were all meticulously documented. I realized that the playful games I had conducted, flirting with colleagues, teasing him in front of friends, stretching small boundaries, were no longer relevant. They had been countered with strategy, precision, and law. I attempted to intervene, to charm him, to reason with him. I explained that my teasing was harmless, that my attention to Mark was insignificant, that everything was innocent. But Ethan remained silent, steady, and immovable. He didn't argue or react with emotion. He allowed the legal process to speak for itself. I realized with rising panic that the strategies I had relied on for years, my wit, charm, and subtle manipulations, were useless against methodical, lawful action. The first formal meeting with his lawyer was a shock. I sat across the table, facing Ethan and the professional authority of legal expertise. Every document, every timeline, every piece of evidence was reviewed systematically. I attempted to justify my actions, to downplay the flirtations, to explain the teasing, but the calm neutrality of the lawyer left no room for excuses. My clever manipulations were powerless against methodical documentation and structured legal process. Even at home, Ethan continued to act with deliberate precision. He maintained schedules, enforced boundaries, and navigated daily life with quiet authority. My attempts at flirtation, casual charm, or playful manipulation were met with unwavering calm. I could feel the children noticing subtle shifts. Sophie asked if Daddy was upset. I smiled weakly and said he was just thinking. Leo tugged at my sleeve, whispering that he missed Daddy. Their innocence made the situation sharper, more real. My actions had affected not just me, but them, and Ethan had acted to preserve their stability while neutralizing my influence. Then came the formal delivery of legal documents. I opened the envelope expecting confrontation, shouting, or at least some emotional reaction. Instead, I found custody arrangements, financial safeguards, and detailed schedules laid out clearly. Ethan had anticipated every angle. My attempts at charm, negotiation, and rationalization had no effect. The reality was undeniable. The consequences of my behavior were formalized, structured, and permanent. I sat alone that evening, the children asleep upstairs, the house quiet except for the faint hum of appliances. Papers lay across the coffee table, a tangible reminder of the consequences I had set in motion. The thrill of manipulation, the excitement of flirtation, the sense of cleverness, it was all gone, replaced with fear, anxiety, and the sharp realization of powerlessness. Ethan had restored order, dignity, and security without raising his voice or creating a scene. His methodical, lawful approach left me exposed, isolated, and entirely at the mercy of his planning. For the first time, I felt true fear, the deep, heavy kind that comes when you realize the life you thought you controlled has been dismantled piece by piece, quietly and efficiently. My freedom, my thrill, my sense of cleverness had triggered consequences far beyond my imagination. Ethan's calm, precise actions had neutralized every advantage I thought I held. The games were over, the thrill was gone, and the lawful strategy he had executed had left me powerless to alter the outcome. By the end of the week, I understood fully that my actions had irrevocable consequences. Every joke, every flirtation, every minor manipulation had set into motion a chain of events that could not be undone. Ethan had reclaimed his dignity, the safety of our children, and control of our family. I had lost not just power, but the illusion of control, and the consequences were clear. My life was no longer mine to manipulate. The morning the final legal documents arrived, I felt a weight pressing in my chest. Ethan had been calm all week, his movements measured, his silence deliberate, and now the reality of his planning hit me fully. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, expecting confrontation, maybe even anger, but instead found documents that were precise, clinical, and final. Custody arrangements, financial protections, and legally binding schedules stared back at me. Every step I had taken, every flirtation, every teasing remark, every social manipulation, had been meticulously documented and counted with methodical precision. The custody arrangements were detailed and exact. Sophie and Leo would spend the majority of their time with Ethan, with weekends and occasional evenings designated for me under strictly defined conditions. School routines, extracurricular activities, bedtime schedules, and weekend plans were all clearly outlined. The children's stability was prioritized above my whims, my games, and my manipulations. I stared at the paper, heart pounding, realizing that the thrill of attention I had chased, the cleverness I had enjoyed, had led to this loss. My influence over the household, my control over my life, had evaporated in one careful, lawful sweep. I tried to speak, to reason, to charm my way into some leniency. "Ethan, we can work this out," I murmured, forcing my voice to sound casual. He looked at me steadily, calm and unshakable. There was no trace of anger or rage in his expression, just the quiet authority of someone who had already won. Every attempt to manipulate, to justify, to charm, was met with silence, leaving me powerless. My cleverness, my words, my manipulations, all meaningless against the law and his patient, methodical execution. Financial protections were equally meticulous. Accounts, assets, and shared funds had been organized in a way that minimized risk from impulsive decisions on my part. Ethan had safeguarded the household finances, ensuring that no matter what I attempted, I could not disrupt the stability of the home. I realized, with growing panic, that even my subtle, everyday manipulations, jokes, flirtations, playful digs, had been anticipated and neutralized. The illusion of control I had lived under for so long was gone. I walked through the house, glancing at the children. Sophie was quietly drawing at the kitchen table. Leo stacked blocks in the living room, and neither fully understood the legal maneuvers at play, yet they sensed the tension. My actions had consequences far beyond my immediate thrill-seeking. I had jeopardized the stability and happiness of the people I loved most, and Ethan had acted to ensure they were protected. I felt a mixture of fear, shame, and helplessness. Even my friends began noticing the shift. Text messages asking why I seemed tense or distracted filled my phone. I smiled and offered vague excuses about work, stress, or fatigue, but I could feel the truth pressing in. No longer could I rely on charm, humor, or social cleverness to deflect attention. Ethan's methodical, lawful approach had exposed me fully, leaving no room for misdirection. I had been clever socially, but law and order had proven stronger than my wit. I remembered the moments that had led here. The joke at the barbecue, the flirtations with Mark, the subtle manipulations with friends and colleagues. Each moment had seemed harmless, playful, a test of wit and charm. But now, faced with the legal documentation and the enforcement of his strategy, I realized just how wrong I had been. Every laugh I had encouraged, every glance I had lingered on, every playful smirk, I had been paving the way for consequences I could not avoid. Ethan didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat or make a scene. He simply executed his plan, restoring order, dignity, and protection. I was left to process the consequences alone. The calmness of his approach was almost more terrifying than anger could have been. My power, my influence, my perceived cleverness, all had been neutralized by patience, law, and planning. The hours passed slowly. I sat alone, staring at the documents on the coffee table. The legal orders confirmed what I had feared. Custody arrangements heavily favored Ethan, financial protections were in place, and boundaries were established that I could no longer cross. I could not manipulate, charm, or excuse my way out. The freedom I had taken for granted, the thrill I had pursued, the cleverness I had prided myself on, it was gone. By evening, the house was quiet. Sophie and Leo were asleep, unaware of the upheaval their parents had navigated, yet their stability remained intact because of Ethan's methodical planning. I sat in the empty living room, the weight of reality pressing down. My clever jokes, my social dominance, my hidden flirtations had led to this: exposure, isolation, and loss of control. I realized for the first time the full scope of my mistakes. My games had consequences that extended far beyond my thrill. The person I had underestimated, mocked, and teased had restored order without confrontation, without drama, and without anger. His victory was silent, lawful, and absolute. I was powerless. In that quiet house, surrounded by documents that spelled out the new reality, I understood a hard truth. My freedom had been an illusion. My control had been a fantasy. Every joke, every smirk, every subtle flirtation had triggered consequences I could not undo. Ethan had reclaimed his dignity, the children's stability, and his household with nothing but patience, precision, and lawful strategy. The thrill of cleverness, the power of teasing, the rush of social dominance, all of it had vanished, replaced by fear, regret, and the stark awareness of my own limitations. I was forced to confront the reality that my actions had consequences far beyond what I had ever imagined, and that the person I had thought I could manipulate had outmaneuvered me entirely. And there, in the quiet aftermath, I finally understood. My games were over, my influence gone, and Ethan's lawful, meticulous victory had restored order, dignity, and control. The story ended not with anger or confrontation, but with the undeniable, unshakable reality of consequences executed to perfection. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.